What if the entire accepted history of humankind is just a convenient screen, hiding the truth about our origins? What if the proof of this is lying in plain sight, but we've been conditioned not to see it? To begin unraveling this knot, we only need to pull on a single thread: the existence of artifacts that baffle official science and shatter our conventional worldview. All across the world, from the misty highlands of Scotland to the ancient vaults of Japan, gigantic swords have been preserved since ancient times. A simple comparison of their size to the height of a modern person raises a logical question. Who could have possibly wielded such a weapon? The weight and dimensions of these blades are such that even several trained men would struggle just to lift them, let alone use them effectively in combat. These aren't isolated finds, but a whole series of artifacts scattered across different corners of the planet. Official science either remains silent or offers unconvincing theories about their ceremonial or ritualistic purpose. That they were not for battle, but for displaying status or as offerings to the gods. However, this explanation crumbles under the weight of simple logic. Why invest colossal effort and valuable resources into creating a functional, perfectly balanced combat blade of enormous size, only for it to hang on a wall or lie in a temple? Many of these swords exhibit a supreme level of metallurgy, perfect balance, and sharpness that would be excessive for a mere symbol of power. They are crafted as if they were truly meant to pierce and slash, to withstand the monstrous stresses of real combat. The practicality of their design screams that they had a direct utilitarian purpose. A weapon is made to be fought with, and if such weapons existed, then there must have been warriors capable of wielding them. This thought inevitably leads us to a topic often dismissed as fantasy or mythology: the subject of giants. But what if myths are merely the distorted echoes of real history? What if our world was once indeed inhabited by giants? These blades serve as silent but powerful proof. They were intended for beings far larger and stronger than us, for warriors whose height and power allowed them to handle with ease what is for us an immovable piece of metal. And here, the physical artifact meets the myth. Legends of giants, titans, and colossi are an integral part of the folklore of nearly every culture on Earth. From the Norse Jotuns to the biblical Nephilim, from the Greek titans to the giants of Native American lore, it's as if humanity has preserved a vague memory of those who were here before us. Perhaps these stories are not fiction, but historical chronicles retold in the language of metaphor. And the giant swords are the very physical evidence that elevates these tales from the category of fairy tales to that of historical hypotheses. Acknowledging this fact forces a re-evaluation of everything we know about the past, as it shatters the foundations of modern history and anthropology. Perhaps this is precisely why the idea is so diligently ignored. But artifacts do not lie. These blades are silent yet compelling witnesses. They tell us that the warriors they were made for truly existed. But a weapon is just a tool one carries. It's logical to assume that beings of such a scale left behind something more substantial. Where did they live? What were their homes, their cities, like? Let's search for their traces not in museums, but in the very architecture that surrounds us. And here, we encounter a mystery on an even grander scale. All over the planet, we find gigantic doors in ancient structures, colossal portals with handles placed at a height unreachable for an ordinary person. Massive doors weighing tens of tons. Why build such entrances if the average human height has always been roughly the same as it is today? It's not just illogical, it's absurd in terms of resource expenditure and practicality. These enormous doors were clearly not meant for us. They are silent architectural evidence, remnants of a previous civilization for whose members such a scale was the norm. This forces a completely different perspective on the grandiose stone structures of the past, the weight of whose blocks reaches hundreds and sometimes thousands of tons. Modern science claims they were moved using primitive mechanisms and the physical force of thousands of people. But even today, we lack the technology to move and place such megaliths with the same ease and precision. So, who built them? The answer seems obvious. It was the same civilization of giants for whom these colossal structures were intended. And at this moment, an even more unsettling paradox arises. When we look at old photographs and engravings, especially from the 19th century, we see an astonishing picture. People in modest, often primitive clothing, traveling by horse and carriage, exist against the backdrop of these monumental, incredibly complex buildings that, we are assured, they had just constructed. There is no logic in this narrative. The scale and complexity of these structures are completely inconsistent with the technological level attributed to that era. It's like claiming that Stone Age tribes built a spaceport. A more plausible and logical version is that our ancestors did not build these cities, but found them. They arrived in ready-made but deserted metropolises left behind by those who came before us, and adapted them for their own needs, not even guessing at the true purpose and technologies embedded within these walls. This gives rise to the theory of a global reset, after which the surviving people, like orphans, simply settled the empty cities left behind by a previous, more powerful race. They didn't fully understand the purpose or principles of the structures around them, but they used them as best they could. This idea radically changes our view of history. If we assume that humanity in its current form is not the pinnacle of evolution, but rather the surviving heirs who settled in the ruins of past greatness, then many historical inconsistencies fall into place. But if this is true, there must be evidence of how entire cities were hidden from us, erasing the very memory of their existence. And there is. One of the most blatant and documented examples occurred in the United States just over 100 years ago. One of the most blatant and documented examples of such an erasure of the past occurred in the United States just over a century ago. In 1915, San Francisco hosted the Panama Pacific International Exposition. The official story is that for this event, temporary yet grandiose pavilions were erected from wood and plaster, including architectural masterpieces like the Court of the Universe and the Arch of the Rising Sun. Millions of visitors from all over the world came to marvel at this incredible dream city, supposedly built in just a couple of years. However, the most astonishing part of this story is its ending. Just 1 year after the exposition concluded, almost all of these incredibly beautiful and massive structures were demolished. This version raises too many questions. Why invest colossal financial, engineering, and human resources into building an entire city, staggering in its architecture and complexity, only to methodically destroy it a year later? It is economically and practically senseless. Even assuming the structures were temporary, their scale and detail suggest an incredible level of craftsmanship that would be irrational to apply to a one-time event. An alternative viewpoint offers a much more logical, albeit shocking, explanation. These buildings were not temporary decorations. They were the remnants of a real ancient city, the heritage of that same previous highly advanced civilization whose traces we found earlier. According to this theory, the exposition served merely as a convenient and brilliant pretext. It allowed the world to be shown this architectural wonder for a short time, to document it in photos and newsreels, and then, under the guise of a planned demolition of temporary pavilions, to wipe it off the face of the earth. Why? So that it wouldn't raise too many inconvenient questions. These structures bore the marks of a completely different technology and aesthetic, possibly linked to the use of infinite energy, and their existence contradicted the version of history that had been decided upon to impose on humanity. It was easier to declare them a temporary fantasy and destroy them than to try to explain who, when, and most importantly, how anyone could have built such things long before the advent of modern technology. The phenomenon of this exposition is not unique. If you look closely, you can see that buildings in a single so-called ancient or imperial style are scattered all over the world. Monumental triumphal arches, majestic colonnades, domed structures, and obelisks can be found not only in Italy or Greece, but also in Russia, Japan, China, and in North and South America. They stand in cities whose history seems to have no connection to the Roman Empire. Why did different peoples, separated by oceans and thousands of kilometers, who, according to the official version, had no close contact, suddenly start building nearly identical, massive, and from a utilitarian point of view, completely useless structures? To explain this as simple imitation or coincidence is impossible. The only logical explanation is that all these buildings are the legacy of a single global civilization that existed before ours and spanned the entire planet. And the architectural similarity is explained not by a commonality of style, but by a unity of function. What if all these columns, arches, and domes were not just decoration, but performed a specific technical task? If we accept this idea, the next question arises. What technologies did the civilization capable of building them possess? The answer may lie in the very architecture of these buildings, if we look at it not as art, but as an engineering solution. Let's shift our perspective and view the familiar cathedrals, temples, and mosques not as places of worship, but as complex technical devices. All these countless spires, domes, columns, and even intricate ornaments, which we are accustomed to seeing as merely decorative elements, could have, in fact, performed a purely practical function. There are forgotten theories about the so-called ether, an invisible, all-pervading substance that is the source of infinite, free energy. What if these buildings were complex antenna systems and resonators, tuned to collect energy directly from this surrounding space? In this paradigm, every architectural element takes on a new meaning. Every metal weather vane, every cross on a dome, every statue was not just an ornament, but part of a gigantic mechanism. High domes could have served as energy accumulators and resonators, while spires reaching for the sky acted as powerful receivers and transmitters. Even the crosses we see everywhere might not have originally been religious symbols, but technical devices, a kind of terminal or waveguide in a complex antenna system. Their shape is perfectly suited for concentrating and directing energy flows. These buildings literally absorbed energy from the air, converted it, and perhaps distributed it wirelessly for the needs of an entire city. Lighting, heating, the operation of machinery, all could have been powered by a single such structure, which today we ignorantly call a temple. The original purpose of these buildings had nothing to do with religion. They were high-tech power stations that provided civilization with clean, free, and infinite energy. How then was this knowledge lost? Religion may have been a later overlay, a way to explain and adapt these majestic and incomprehensible structures for new, simplified needs, after the knowledge of their true purpose was lost. After a global cataclysm, or reset, the surviving people no longer understood how these machines worked. They saw their grandeur, perhaps felt their residual energy field, or were amazed by their unique acoustics, but they could no longer operate them. And so they began to worship them, turning technological centers into places for rituals. Thus arose a cargo cult of planetary scale, where descendants worshipped the technologies of their ancestors, mistaking them for divine miracles. This technological gap becomes especially obvious when we compare these majestic structures with the primitive buildings attributed to our ancestors. It's impossible to imagine that a society capable of erecting such architectural masterpieces suddenly forgot how to build even basic quality housing. This is a clear sign of two different civilizations. One, highly advanced, left behind these grand structures. The other, ours, came later and simply occupied what was left. But if such a technology of free energy existed, it made people independent and free, and that means there must have been forces with a keen interest in hiding it and replacing it with a costly, controlled energy source. How exactly did they manage to erase such a fundamental technology from human memory? The loss of knowledge about free energy was just one part of a global process of erasing the memory of the past and suppressing more efficient and accessible technologies. Humanity was deliberately led down a path of dependence, forced to pay for what was once free. And to see that this isn't just a matter of the distant past, we only need to go back to the early 20th century. At that time, the skies were graced not only by the first clumsy airplanes. There was a real, safe, and incredibly cheap alternative: airships. These flying machines were not just experimental transport. They were the pinnacle of engineering of their era, promising humanity a new age of freedom of movement. Imagine a world where this technology was allowed to develop. Airship travel was smooth, comfortable, and economical. Huge air vessels, running on abundant elements like helium or hydrogen, could travel thousands of kilometers, carrying hundreds of passengers and tons of cargo. They didn't need giant runways. They could hover over any point and moor neatly to high masts. This meant a decentralized transportation system. If this technology had been developed, a personal flying machine capable of taking you anywhere on the continent could have been affordable for 1 in every 100 people. But this was not profitable for the ruling elite. Freedom of movement is a direct threat to any system of control. The huge profits generated today by air travel, the sale of oil, the construction of airports, and related services would have been impossible in a world of airships. Therefore, this technology had to be discredited, presented as dangerous and unviable. And for this purpose, a perfect performance was staged. The tragic incident with the airship Hindenburg in 1937 became just such a well-orchestrated PR campaign. The spectacular outcome, widely circulated in the press and newsreels, forever seared the image of the airship as a fiery trap into the public consciousness. The footage of the burning giant circled the globe, becoming a symbol of the unreliability and mortal danger of the entire technology. After that, flights were almost universally banned, and all research and funding were cut. A convenient, cheap, and promising technology was buried alive. Humanity was instead offered the expensive, noisy, and resource-intensive path of aviation, which benefited only large corporations and governments seeking to control the movement of their citizens. We were not just given substitute technologies, forcing us to pay for what should be free. We were given a substitute reality, with our very perception of our planet distorted beyond recognition. What if even the mountains are not what they seem? Official science teaches us that volcanoes are natural geological formations, mountains that erupt lava from the Earth's molten core. But if you compare the appearance of a dormant volcano with a spoil tip, a giant mountain of waste rock left over from large-scale mining operations, the resemblance is striking. The same perfect conical shape, the same layered structure, the same visible traces of excavation at the base. This leads to the thought that volcanoes are nothing more than gigantic waste dumps from the mining industry of a previous civilization. The scale of their operations was truly planetary. They extracted resources in quantities we cannot even imagine today. Their technology allowed them to process entire mountain ranges, And the waste from these activities was so immense that we, their descendants, have mistaken these artificial mountains for creations of nature. The periodic eruptions, in this case, are not the release of magma, but rather internal chemical or thermonuclear reactions within these industrial waste repositories, which heat up and spill onto the surface. When we begin to realize the scale of such a falsification, the question of our world's boundaries inevitably arises. Does the map we are shown in school correspond to reality? A hypothesis exists that the territory we inhabit is just one of many cells on a vast planet, and what we call the South Pole is actually a gigantic ice wall encircling our world. This idea, known as the flat or cellular Earth theory, may seem absurd at first glance, but it offers a logical explanation for many oddities. For example, why all aviation routes in the southern hemisphere follow strange arched trajectories, avoiding a direct crossing of Antarctica. The official explanation has to do with air currents and fuel economy, but an alternative version states that pilots are simply flying around this insurmountable ice barrier. Beyond this wall, there may be other lands, other continents, and perhaps other worlds, inhabited by different beings. This theory explains why Antarctica is the most militarized and closed-off zone on the planet. According to the Antarctic Treaty, signed by the world's leading powers, the continent is declared a neutral scientific zone, free from military activity. In practice, however, it is strictly guarded, and access for independent researchers is nearly impossible. Any attempt to organize a private expedition deep into the continent is harshly suppressed. What are they hiding there with such diligence? Beneath the miles-thick ice may lie not just traces, but entire cities and technological complexes of the previous civilization. There are testimonies and satellite images that show the outlines of giant pyramids and other artificial structures emerging from the ice. If these objects are real, their exploration could completely overturn our understanding of the past. Perhaps this is where the keys to free energy and other lost knowledge are kept. And that is why access is closed. The information about what lies beneath the Antarctic ice must not be allowed to become public and disrupt the existing world order. What are they so desperately hiding there? And what methods do they use to ensure the truth never surfaces? To conceal the traces of the past and maintain control, not only prohibitions and the falsification of history are used, but also more radical methods. There is a version that some historical cataclysms were not random events, but deliberate acts of destruction, carried out with weapons we can only guess at. If you compare photographs of the aftermath of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima with footage taken after the Great San Francisco Fire of 1906, you can notice a frightening similarity. In both cases, we see the almost complete destruction of buildings turned to dust, while some structures, especially those built with old-world technologies, remain standing almost untouched amid the general chaos. Officially, the fire in San Francisco was caused by an earthquake, but the nature of the destruction suggests the use of a directed energy weapon, a technology capable of precisely destroying entire cities without leaving a radiation trail. Perhaps such cleanups have occurred repeatedly throughout history to destroy the artifacts and centers of the ancient civilization that could have revealed the truth about the past. Putting all these pieces together, the giant artifacts, the cities of unknown purpose, the lost technologies, and the rewritten history, we arrive at a staggering conclusion. We are not the masters of this planet. We are more like guests, or perhaps even squatters, living in a foreign, inherited world whose true history and mechanics we do not understand. We are surrounded by the ruins of a great civilization whose capabilities were incomparable to our own. We walk on streets we did not lay, and live in the shadow of buildings we did not construct. Proof of this mismatch can be found not only in architecture, but in nature itself. The petrified remains of enormous trees, now mistaken for rock formations, and the traces of giant animals and people, all suggest that the world was once home to beings of a completely different scale. We, in our current form, are merely a diminished and perhaps genetically altered version of those who lived here before us. We live in their world, but its scale is alien to us. Acknowledging all of this requires courage, because it leads to a complete collapse of one's worldview. If even a part of these hypotheses is true, it means that everything we were taught in school is a lie. All of official history becomes a fiction, created to hide the truth about the previous civilization. All of science that denies the existence of free energy becomes a tool for maintaining technological enslavement. All religions prove to be merely later interpretations, designed to fill the vacuum of knowledge. It is a frightening thing to admit, because it means we are living in an artificially created reality, where we are fed a convenient but false picture of the world. Most people instinctively reject this information, because it shatters their comfort zone. But awakening to a new reality, however painful, is the only path to liberation. Only by realizing that we are living among ruins and deceit can we begin to ask questions, seek true knowledge, recover lost technologies, and ultimately, reclaim the heritage that was taken from us.